I'm good. Been writing. Please excuse the. I've been writing all day, but not the fun stuff. I've been writing commentaries today.
All writing's fun stuff.
it's, it's not when you've got an idea of what you're trying to say and you can't quite get it out properly, and you're not allowed to use flowery language because it's academic. That's my usual voice. I can't remember what to say, so I'll just chuck a load of purple prose in, and that get me out of it.
No, that's the fun part. And yeah, I was in a meeting today, and when they asked me for my opinion on something, I thought, should I use flowery language, or does the word bullshit cover it? And yeah, everybody understood what I was on about without my needing to use flowery language. Yes.
Not that I'm saying flowery language in any way to foreshadow or foreground anything that we're about to talk about at all.
No. What we're about to talk about, Colin?
We're about to talk about, hang on a second, I've got to look the name up of it again because my brain is just not working properly. It is an account of some strange disturbance on Aungier Street. By some Irish writer by the name of Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu.
Yep, Joe the Fanny.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was a 1980s, like, was it the follow-up to Je le Taxi? Would you like a synopsis?
Yeah, I would absolutely love a synopsis, please.
Okay. First of all, we'll do it as Aungier Street, which apparently is how it's pronounced to sound like angrier. So it's Aungier Street. Was it danger? Aungier. No, it's Aungier. That's right. I was getting my pronunciations mixed up. Most interesting thing. Anyway, Aungier Street is this house on Aungier Street that this guy, Tom Ludlow's father, owns. And the narrator of the story is Tom Ludlow's cousin. And this father owns a number of properties on Aungier Street. And because these two are studying and they're students, he lets them have this house. And then strange things happen. There are ghostly things. There are recurring dreams. There are little children. There are old people with stories. And all this kind of goes on, and bad feelings and horrible feelings in particular rooms. And then bad judges, ghost judges who are hanging judges. And all this kind of accumulates around to being all this kind of spooky stuff, so that the narrator ends up not sleeping and drinking too much and sitting up on his own for large, long periods of time until he speaks to an 80-year-old woman whose grandmother, who was 80 at the time, told the story of this hanging judge and how he was a bastard and all he wanted to do was hang the fuck out of people, and ended up hanging himself so that he could gain the powers of being on the other side and therefore be able to encourage other people to do the hanging for him, including the convincing of a child to just die without any other kind of, intervening going on. So that's kind of what was going on. So we've got a story in an old house, a couple of students seeing things to do with hanging judges and stuff like that. Please forgive the fidelity of my synopsis, but was that the kind of story that you read there?
Eventually, yes. That was eventually what I managed to read. Yeah. God, it was hard work, wasn't it?
Yeah, distilling it down into that kind of synopsis, there's some very interesting things with this story. There are some interesting things, but I don't think they're in the story itself.
Do you know, the most maddening thing is that synopsis that you just recited there makes it sound fascinating. Somebody's going to tune into this and going to think, oh, that sounds like an interesting story. Let's have a little bit of a look at Joe Fanny. And they are going to be so fucking disappointed. The framed narration, I mean, it started off and there's about 5 minutes of someone just waffling on about how make yourself comfy, sit down, you're about to read this, or get somebody to read it. Just tell me the fucking story.
Well, the other synopsis, I have two synopses for this one.
Right.
Okay, the other synopsis is, if you want a really good synopsis for this one, go back to our previous podcast for The Judge's House by Bram Stoker.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Yeah, because it it is the same story. I mean, this is 26 years before Bram Stoker's story. And in the research, I actually did some research because I needed something that was going to be entertaining me. And it does seem to be that Bram Stoker was a fan, and that actually the judge's house was his own retelling of this story. So that's where I find something interesting within it, because I agree with you. The whole opening line of, I think it's hardly worth telling my little story,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, don't fucking bother. Yeah. If you're going to be like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I didn't realize that this was the preceding story before we got Bram Stoker. Bram Stoker's was so readable. The Judge's House was just fantastic. This one, I think I must have tried about 6 or 7 times to read it or to listen to it, and just found myself drifting because it was so fucking florid, so purple, so disjointed. And yeah, the only part that really stuck with me was the fact that we've got a hanged judge who was also a hanging judge, not hanging at the time as, but hanging as in he ordered people to be taken from the court to be executed. And it's almost as though we can see that that's something that the societies of the time found quite chilling. That there were potentially evil judges with this power.
Yes, I mean, it's at a time, isn't it, where you get hanged for stealing bread.
Yeah.
So there was you still kind of get it now in the fact that a judge is one person's thing. That's why you had to end up with juries to find you guilty. And then the punishment itself is handed down by a judge. And so if you get a right horrible bastard, it's the perfect place to be a serial killer, isn't it? Because you can just do it by proxy. You can just sit there and just say, as if it's on the books that you can send this person to death, you send that person to death. And some judges were notorious for sending huge amounts of people to the gallows, and some were more lenient and, would just send people to the prisons or let them off with a fine. But that's why they had to bring in rules. That's why nowadays there's a book that actually says what the maximum penalty of law is. Because when it was left purely down to the judges, that you had these big swings in what people were sort of like punished with. So it does make it does make sense that these kind of things were frightening and would be frightening ghost stories at the time.
When was this one written?
1856, I think. Hang on.
We've got this one out the
1853.
We've got Bram Stoker's, which came out later on. So this is throughout the whole of the Victorian period. And we're seeing people have got this horror that's basically based at people with godlike powers.
Yes.
Almost as though society's realizing that the Old Testament God can be a violent arbiter of, a violent harbinger of menace and unjust punishment.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it's got an awful lot of validity in what should make it scary, but I was too bored to be scared whilst it was going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of things that came out of this. I totally and utterly agree with everything you're saying. I found myself doing stupid things. I was sat there listening to it because I thought I was at home. I thought I'll bang it through the hi-fi and I'll sit back and listen to it. And I found myself reading news websites whilst it was on. And it was like, I shouldn't be doing this. It's not captivating me enough to do it. So then I was going back and I was trying to analyze it. I listened to it once and then I went back and tried to analyze it and think, is it the language that's the problem? That it demonstrates something else that we spoke about last week with Ramsey Campbell, actually. But I think one of its biggest problems is it's caught between two storytelling traditions. One is the oral tradition of telling stories. I think, and something that I've been, I'm married to a woman from Ireland. My mother is from Ireland, and the tradition of telling stories around the fireside, and they are a people of very, very good storytellers, and they're very engaging when you're sat around a fireside and they're trying to tell you about it. And I imagine this story is an absolutely wonderful one, and it starts that way. It kind of starts with you've got a tale for you. Now, it might not be worth telling, but there's this spooky house, and it really sets its path going that way. However, he's writing it down. So it seems to then be trying to place on top of that a kind of literary note to say it's worthy of being written. If I put it in poetry terms, it's like you get spoken word poetry and page poetry. And page poetry doesn't always work when you read it out. Though spoken word poetry can work as a written, but you have to hear it in your head. You have to almost read it out loud to be able to get it. So I think if he'd left it as a telling, as an oral traditional type thing, and just wrote it in the way that someone speaks, it would have been so much more compelling. Or if you got rid of the oral tradition and just sat down and wrote it from a literary point of view, which is pretty much what Bram Stoker did with it, then it becomes a more compelling story, because the story between this and The Judge's House is identical. It is. I mean, the rat is even as a manifestation of the judge. It's even, everything about it is there. Though this guy was staying up late and drinking a lot, where he was just having very strong tea in Bram Stoker's one. But the thing is that shows you how this one story with the same plot, pretty much the same characters, because he was a student in that one as well, just removed one of the characters, becomes more compelling because of the way it's written. And that's because that was a literary one. So I think he was caught between the two, and that damages it a lot for me when I was listening to it.
I think also the snootiness of the way he's dismissing other people's narratives within it, saying that some of the servants have got other stories, but we don't want to hear from them. It's just, you egotistical twat. It was,
which would be funny round. This is what I'm saying. That would be funny around the fireside. That's there are certain elements where you sit there and go, it's a performance. And as you know, you don't write a whole performance down. That's almost like the tiny little things that you say in between things just to get the kids laughing before you frighten them again, But to write it down, it doesn't do for the character itself. And I'd just like to state, this particular story is held in very, very high regard amongst people that are fans of Le Fanu and fans of Victorian ghost stories.
Right. But we've already seen how people hold Charles Dickens the Signalman in high regard.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So it's another one of those. But
I mean, just to go off on a slight tangent, whilst I was listening to it, I got it in whilst I was at the gym, and got distracted and thought, I'm not even hearing this anymore. So clicked over to Spotify and started listening to a podcast about serial killers. And it's one that I've heard before, and I was listening to, it was more entertaining than the story. I was listening to somebody talking about The Murder of Grace Budd by Albert Fish.
Oh, yeah.
But Albert Fish, when he kidnapped Grace Budd, he used an assumed name. And the assumed name he used was Frank Howard, which made me think, just like Frankie Howard. And yeah, and because of him, I'm going to eat your child, Tittyina.
Oh no, Mrs. No, don't.
Yeah. But yeah.
Wow.
So the murder of that child was more entertaining than this story.
Well, I mean, yeah, it is down to the way it's written, I think. And this is where it kind of comes in, because one of the ones I want to go back and read now, because the other influential part of Le Fanu into Bram Stoker, and I think having this conversation, you've got to mention both, because he wrote that Camilla, and a lot of that kind of turns up in Dracula.
Yeah, first female vampire in fiction. Yeah.
So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that is interesting. It's almost like, is he a man that had great ideas but just didn't have the I don't know, because I mean he was popular at the time, wasn't he? Maybe Purple Prose were popular at the time. Maybe we're looking at this is what I was talking about with Ramsey Campbell last week, isn't it? That what Bram Stoker is doing is that standing on the shoulders of giants thing. He is taking something and with the extra knowledge, he is able to filter it through his imagination and end up with Dracula and end up with the Judge's House, which for my money are more frightening, are more tense-filled and better paced than this one, because the pacing on it was just all over the place, in the way that it was trundling along. And it's I think it's only about 40 minutes as well, but it felt longer because there was so much of it that that were just irrelevant to the story, to the plot or the characters.
And so many I mean, at one point there's a bear-like figure wandering through the house. Was that meant to be the judge, or was that meant to, or a bear?
That's where the oral tradition comes in. It's almost like, if you get someone who's making up a ghost story around the campfire, you just throw tropes at it all the time, and it's like it almost becomes like a TV serial of and then here's my cliffhanger, and then it comes in, and that's how this felt. It felt like overly, not even overly described. It was
overly troped.
Yeah, and it was almost like a mix, like a smorgasbord of ghost stories, which I don't mind, but it needs to be. We were talking the other week, weren't we? What's more important, character or plot?
Yes.
Yeah. And I said you can get away with a weaker plot with strong characters than you can get away with a strong plot and weak characters.
Yes.
And I think this kind of shows that when you have the weak characters, you're not pulling it back with the plot. You're not, you can throw as much into that plot as you want. You're not pulling it back because the character, you're just not connecting with it on any particular level.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you've hit the nail on the head. The author was just throwing trope after trope after trope of, this will scare him, this will scare him, this will scare him. And at the end, you've got an audience that are more confused and dodging tropes rather than being scared.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's that classic thing of, it's like the jump scares, isn't it? It's like Final Destination, highly entertaining, loads of jump scares, but it's not scary.
Yeah,
it's a more of it's trying to be an entertainment ride, and in the tradition of reading out, you can see. I mean, I know we both listen to audiobooks of this.
Yeah,
but if you had someone in front of an audience of 5 or 6 people in a parlor, and you're telling that story, and you're putting all the oohs and and then and you're doing that performance with it, then you can see how this story would work in the way that it's written, but it requires a performance, not just a reading. It's not just a set of words to be able to pull out everything that is needed from the story.
Yeah, fully agree. I was really looking forward to this one, and it just turned out to be such a disappointment.
But that's why I say he's looking at it from the other point of view. Let's look at it from this idea of now we have Bram Stoker and Bram Stoker's retelling. And I think this is where this becomes a really interesting exercise in looking at it. And I'm really pleased we read it for this. Is we have actually got 2 stories that are identical, but you can see how the adaptation has worked. You can see what he's done to distill down concepts and to merge characters together and to bring things inside and outside of the house. So that even though the story itself is identical, he's been able to manipulate it into a much more concise and much more terrifying story. That I find interesting. That comparison, I think, is very, very interesting indeed.
I think it's down to the concision. I think Bram Stoker, in his version of it, never lets you lose focus of it. You're either in the house, or somebody's talking about the judge, or there's that rat that's appearing there, or he's been woken up by the noise of the rats. You never lose sight of the fact that this is a house that's haunted by the ghost of a judge, and there's that rat connection that's going on there. Whereas with Le Fanu's version, you're in a house and it's a series of occurrences that have happened there, and they don't seem to be related. And it's that lack of unity that makes it difficult to follow. You know, where you're sort of like thinking, oh, should I be making a connection there? Is there a connection? I neither know nor care because we've gone on to something else that's slightly different.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. We've got exactly the same story, but yeah, you can sort of like see how one. I don't know. Do you think it's that for Le Fanu's period of time, the audience were more intelligent or more easily pleased, or maybe it's that the audience in Stoker's time are a little bit thicker and needed the dots joining together more obviously?
No, I think it's just a progression. I think it's a progression of literature. I think it's more what you're looking at here. I mean, if it's like with Frankenstein, you know, going back to 1880, it's a brilliant story that most people nowadays don't know. They only know the adaptations of it, where the concepts have been distilled down and characters have been created in order to be able to tell the story across. Because, I mean, the original Frankenstein was like 2 volumes and is full of huge moralistic monologue type stuff. And then it was, you know, distilled down into a single volume. But within all the different adaptations that have happened, we end up with like the James Whale's 1931 movie version of it, which isn't the first filmed version. The first film version is from the Edison Company, which is a 12-minute from 1910. And that's a different story. Again, that has a happy ending, funnily enough, not like the one you're thinking of. But so I think you're looking at this constant increase, and this is where I was bringing the Ramsey Campbell thing in on top of something like H.P. Lovecraft, in that you're looking at an evolution of story writing that goes from being, you know, having to kind of explicitly try and tell emotions and try and evoke emotions by using over illiterate descriptions that end up at Ramsey Campbell, who is able to elicit emotions by just throwing in metaphor, because the understanding of language is so much more than what's being used at the time in the late 1850s. So if you follow that up, and Bram Stoker sits in there, and then you've got H.G. Wells, Bram Stoker, then that moves into H.P. Lovecraft, and you know, and you're moving up, and you got Shirley Jackson in there as well, where these very, very important literary figures, not necessarily because of the stories they write, but because of the way they write and because of the way they take it forward. Virginia Woolf, for example, is a classic example of changing the way that people perceive the usage of words within a story itself. You know, she's writing stories that even, you know, you're looking at it and it doesn't matter whether something is real or not. You actually get this really unnerving and kind of skewed view of the world because of how she writes it. If you tried to write that in 1850, people probably wouldn't have liked it at all, because everything has to evolve and the audiences evolve and mature. So as things change and alter because people want a different type of entertainment, you know, what is it now? We're movies more than books in terms of the entertainment value. So everything's moved on from that way.
Well, I was going to say we've moved on from movies to binge watching series on TV programs.
Yeah, pretty much. We're now. I mean, when Zack Snyder's Justice League came out as a 4-hour movie, there were still people out there that went, "Oh my god, 4 hours!" And you're like, "Yeah." Just, you know, we sit there and watch. I mean, Sandman, for example, that came out as 10 episodes, and me and Heather watched the entire lot in 2 nights. And then discovered the other night that there's an 11th episode come out. That's a bonus episode that they snuck out there, which we love. But that's how you consume things now. And I even go back and consume things. I'm watching Blackadder again at the moment, which is it's just pure genius writing from, you know, a lot of points of view. But I'm binging it. I'm not watching it, you know, as a week by week like we originally watched Blackadder. And you see different things. You see the repeated jokes, you see the way that they actually constructed the whole series, because that's how it was written. You know, the whole thing's written before they film it, so you're actually watching it more in the way that the writer had conceived rather than the way it was distributed.
I mean, I don't think I've actually binge watched anything in the proper sense of binge watching. I'll watch something an episode each night, but I can't cope with more than one episode a night. I'm very, very lukewarm like that.
No, as soon as they started bringing it on video, it's one of those. It's a great way of watching things sometimes, and so, as soon as I was able to do it, it kind of made sense. And it's the first thing I ever binge watched, believe it or not, was V in the 1980s.
Wow!
Right, because it was a mini series, and I was away at an army cadet camp, and my parents recorded the whole mini series for me. Right, and I came home, and I sort of, I'd come back and I'd have my bath and sat down with my dinner about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I started watching it. And because it was all on one video, I think it was on 2 video cassettes that we had, and I sat there and I watched the whole lot in one night, because I just got back from camp. And so I watched the whole story. So the whole thing was just like a long movie for me. And I thought it was great because I wasn't waiting. I wasn't getting frustrated. Sometimes it can work. I watch my Doctor Who weekly rather than binge watch, but it's just...
Yeah, but that's because you're worried about spoilers, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of the time you're just trying to get it in before anyone else starts talking about it.
But yeah, with this one, I think your original point was absolutely spot on, that he's trying to write an oral story, and it's got pieces of oral in it, it's got pieces of writing in it, and it's got everything thrown in there and no structure.
Yes. Yeah. It comes across like that to me. And let's say, and as the evolution picks it up, as it moves on to the next level, Bram Stoker picks it up, puts structure on top of it. And like I say, I think that's a really nice thing to say, isn't it? It's filtered through the mind of. It's taken an idea and filtering it through the mind of another writer, so that you are getting their imagination on top of it as well. And that's what I was saying about the Ramsey Campbell one, is writers nowadays should be head and shoulders above what we were reading past. We should be, and it's like your H.P. Lovecraft ones, the Innsmouth Tales from Innsmouth. They are fantastic. They are better than what H.P. Lovecraft was writing, and they should be. They really should be, because it's distilling, it's filtering it through. So you're not taking away any of the H.P. Lovecraft stuff, but you're using a lot of the modern techniques and what you know and all your knowledge and placing it on top of the Lovecraft, mythos, and that should be making a better, stronger narrative.
Yeah, no, I'm right. I can go to bed satisfied now.
Yeah. And I'm someone whose writing style is very much in the Victorian, style. So I'm beginning to think, well, am I just shit? No, it merges together. It's great seeing where a lot of our stuff comes from. You can read Stephen King, I think, now with a completely fresh pair of eyes, going back and reading all these old short stories, because you can really see where the seeds come from. Yeah,
I think you can. And one of these days we're going to have to go through a Stephen King short story.
Well, I tell you what, I'm hoping we'll get to 52. This is going to be like 40 something, 47, I think it is today. We'll get to 52, and that'll give us a year's worth of these short stories. And after episode 52, I want us to do discussing authors for a few episodes. I want us to pick authors, and so that we can go through them as bits of work and actually discuss them as why we think they're brilliant and why we think they're rubbish, and we'll see where those discussions go.
Right. So does that mean I can actually pick a Stephen King short story then for next week?
Well, we've already got, like I said, we've already gone modern, 1983. Oh, what date does this one come from? Stephen King. Let's do a King. Come on, bring him on. What is it?
1982.
Nice. Yeah.
The story is called The Boogeyman. And I've got to admit, this is one of my favourite ones of his.
Yes. He does write a good short story.
Yeah.
I think that's his best format, actually, short stories.
I'm fairly sure this was from Graveyard Shift, his first collection of short stories.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Very good. Right. Well, there you go. So we'll be reading the Boogeyman.
Boogeyman, yes.
That should be fun.
Yeah, should be relief from what we've just been reading anyway.
Yeah, it was a dirge, but like I say, it's very interesting in the history of things and definitely connects one of the dots going backwards.
Definitely.
So, so there's lots of family trees that can come out of these things.
And whilst we're saying that this one that we're looking at is a modern one, it's 40 years old.
Shut up.
1982 was 40 years ago.
I was 11 when it got published.
Yeah, I can't even do the maths for how old I was.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Unless it was published after the 23rd then of December, then I would have been 12. But no, it's
yeah, we're gonna have fun with that one.
40 years old. Yeah. Well, mind you, in saying that, that's the weird thing, isn't it? Because we've read stories that when we were like around about 1980, so this is now 40 years old. So when this was out and absolutely brand new, we're reading stories that were 40 years before that, the 1940s. That's Pigeons from Hell.
Yeah.
It's 40 years before this one, so 80. My goodness,
80 years old. Wow.
And it shows actually how much Pigeons from Hell gets better and better and better for me the more we read of this old stuff.
Yeah,
that really does.
Really a lot of fun.
Right. Anyway, let's take something. So another wonderful conversation. Thank you very much, Ash.
Thank you. Really enjoyed that one. Yeah. Yes.
See you later, mate.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.